candidate will have 1 minute for closing. League members, show where you are in the front seat for timers. They're going to have a 30-second and a 15-second warning. So this is for the candidates so they can quickly wrap up their thoughts before the stop sign. And the time limits will be enforced out of respect for everybody here. And we will be gathering questions from the audience, and there are some of my runners here that have pink cards. So they're going to hand them out with pencils and be gathering them up. So please ask questions too that are pertinent to both candidates. All the questions are going to be reviewed for clarity, appropriateness, and to avoid duplication. And candidates are asked not to interrupt each other. And if the moderator, if they need to hear a question again, the moderator will repeat the question. And audience, please make sure to turn off your electronic devices. And please hold any applause until the end. And please do not demonstrate or support any candidate in any way. And there is space in the lobby for the candidates to speak to supporters after the forum, and campaign literature will be available in the lobby. Thank you.
Got a question?
I'd like to again introduce our moderator today, Mr. Tom Bradley, who is the WGN television political reporter and news anchor. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Laura. Gentlemen, welcome. There is no way you could possibly be as good as the women running House District 51, but we'll give this a shot. So this forum is for the candidates for Illinois Senate District 26, Mr. Tom Georges and Senator Dan McConchie. We will start with your 2-minute introduction, and by draw, Mr. Georges, you will go first.
Starting early. Well, good morning. My name is Tom Georges, and I'm running for Illinois State Senate in District 26. Hopefully everyone can hear me, because even I'm not used to these here. I grew up in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. I joined the military and eventually retired as an Army colonel. I returned home and began researching my elected officials, and it became obvious to me that politics within our district has become very polarized. It's become very extreme, and the current elected officials, they just do not have the moderate conservative approach along with receptiveness to the socially progressive changing times. Legislators must remain current and voting records must reflect the people they represent. Legislators should reflect equal rights. They should they need to raise themselves above their religious beliefs and their religious education and do what's best for all individuals. I believe in economic development. I think we need a huge amount of fiscal responsibility, and that fiscal responsibility needs to start from the top. One thing I always ask is, why does Illinois have 59 state senators when California has 40 and Texas only has 31? Making it real short so I don't take up my full 2 minutes, my name is Tom Georges, and I'm running for Illinois State Senate. Thank you.
Okay, 2 minutes, Mr. Senator.
Thank you. My name is Dan McConchie. I've been in the office now for just over 2 years. And, so a little bit about my background. I served 9 years in the infantry and military police. I did and worked in nonprofit work for over 20 years before. I never thought I would actually run for office before I came, but I realized that there's a lot of issues that are facing our state. We haven't had a balanced budget, a true balanced budget, since 2001. We have, as has been mentioned earlier, the second highest property taxes in the nation. Lake and McHenry County actually have the highest property taxes in our entire state. And then we have embedded corruption in the state, both at the state level as well as at the local level, especially in the city of Chicago. A lot of people, when they go down to Springfield, they show up and it takes them a couple of years before they're able to kind of get their feet under them, if you will. And it was interesting that I was able to hit the ground running. Last year, I was one of the chief negotiators on education funding reform that helped not only drive more money into schools, but to change the way in which we are distributing those funds to help the poorest schools first, to begin that gradual shift that needs to take place in order to shift primarily from property taxes as the primary source of funding over to money from the state in order to be able to do that. Also this year, It was one of the bills that I carried. There was pension reform that helped do some things with our pensions that will save over $400 million a year, that was incorporated as a part of the budget and is going to be saving taxpayers money even starting this fiscal year. That's the kind of leadership I brought to the table, kind of bipartisan leadership. While I have my principles, I'm really pleased to be able to work across the aisle. We have great friends on the other side of the aisle and be able to get things done and deliver, not just for our district, but for our state.
Thank you. Thank you both for your service, by the way. All right, so 1 minute to answer a few of my questions, and then I'll work in some audience questions as well. We'll start with you, Senator McConchie. This week, President Trump said that women are doing fine and men are guilty before they're actually found guilty. Would you unpack that and react to that, please?
I can never pretend to unpack President Trump's comments. Most of them are beyond my comprehension. You know, one of the things that I'll say is that in regards to sexual harassment, I think that the current state that we have, and the state that we've had for many decades, has been unfortunate. I've talked to women, whether it be my wife or others that I've worked with, and I just asked my assistant the other day, I said, have you, you know, to what extent have you suffered from sexual harassment? She said, oh, absolutely I have, and then she told me some stories about what it is. We have to get this under control. We have to address it. We do need to have a presumption of innocence that is maintained here, you know, so that someone can't just be accused and have their life ruined. But at the same time, it is vitally important that we not only respect women, but are responsive to them when these issues come up.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. George, 1 minute.
I think this goes on the premise or basic rights or human rights, equal rights, everything above. This has developed and have grown over a long period of time. Women, I even asked my wife the same question, and she very much agrees that throughout her time she has mentioned a number of times where she has been approached in a way which was very inappropriate. And as a woman, you know, you feel for them, because I don't experience the same thing that she does. I have 2 daughters myself, so I can't envision what they go through. President Trump, in a sense, I can't imagine, or I can't even think how he's saying certain things and how he's even doing certain things. However, that's our president. To say the least, I think we need a lot of change on a social scale. I think equal rights is a huge thing that we need to seriously consider in a modern day, modern time frame. And that's something that we need to vote in a positive manner and make sure our legislators vote in equal rights as well. Thank you.
Mr. Georges, we'll stick with you. 1 minute, let's talk guns. Governor Rauner vetoed the Gun Dealer Licensing Act. The measure would require gun shops to obtain a state license and have it renewed every 5 years. It would also require in-store videotaping and employee training on identifying straw purchases. Is that a good bill?
Well, my opponent also voted against the Gun Dealer Licensing Act here in the state of Illinois. Yes, I think it's a very good deal. You have veterinarians, you have dentists, you have truck drivers who all need special licenses in order to perform their job. They take a test and then they're given a license. It's accountability. It's making sure that they are accountable for what they do and who they actually conduct business with. So yes, I think passing a Gun Dealer Licensing Act is a very good thing in the state of Illinois.
Senator.
I'm not necessarily opposed to licensing. I think that you know, we do have an unusual situation with firearms dealers in that they are also registered and regulated by the federal government. One of the issues with the current bill that sits before the governor is that it has some relatively onerous provisions if you're a very small business. And it applies to businesses that sell as few as 10 firearms a year. You know, whenever there's a difference between us in that you know, I do not simply vote for legislation just because it sounds good. I look at the specifics. I ask what is the problem it is that we're trying to solve. And in this particular case, it is extraordinarily onerous on very small businesses, and I'm told by those business owners that it will put them out of business. And as a result, I think that there should be changes made. I did vote against the original version of this because it exempted big box stores. I thought that that was wrong. That has been changed, but some of the other provisions that are extraordinarily onerous on small businesses need to be changed as well.
Senator McConchie, we'll stick with you. Same topic here. 3 women who've lost loved ones to gun violence filed a federal lawsuit yesterday, actually, demanding the state of Illinois do more to combat gun violence. They want a court to force state officials, including the governor, to regulate gun trafficking. They also want to establish that African American children who live in Chicago are disabled or listed as disabled or at risk due to their exposure to gun violence. What do you make of this approach?
Well, I'm not familiar with the specifics of it. I am always a little wary of trying to use the courts to force social change. I think that's something that we should be doing through the legislative process. I mean, obviously, the issue with firearms in the city of Chicago, illegal firearms, is a difficult issue. It's something that there were just in the last week 400 guns in one particular case that had been stolen that were recovered. This is a significant issue that we need to address. 64% of the illegal guns that we have that are recovered in the city of Chicago come from out of state. Unless we're going to build a wall, unless we're going to stop people from coming across the border from Indiana and Wisconsin, we're somewhat limited by our ability to be able to regulate and address those. Now, we did a bill that would last year that would extend the penalties for people who were caught using an illegal gun. Unfortunately, the city of Chicago's judges have so far refused to enforce that. I think we need to revisit it again and get it enforced.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. George, do you need the question again, or are you good?
Sure, you can do that. That'd be great.
3 women who lost loved ones to gun violence have filed a federal lawsuit demanding the state of Illinois do more to combat gun violence. They want a court to force state officials, including the governor, to regulate gun trafficking. They also want to establish that African American children who live in Chicago are disabled or at risk of being disabled due to their exposure to gun violence. What do you make of this approach?
Well, first of all, I would take out the racial type because I think it applies to everybody. So that being said, I think I'm a 31-year military veteran, so having a weapon in my hand is something that's very familiar to me. That being said, those on the streets, of course, don't have that same familiarity, and they don't have the same concept or idea of what to do with the weapon. I think they use it in a very negative manner. I think we need more assault weapon type bans. I think the assault weapon ban, which my opponents voted against, is one of the things that we need to change. I think banning bump stocks, I think, is something we need to change here in the state of Illinois. And as was discussed before, even the gun dealer licensing act. We could have changed that or amended that and still passed it, but it wasn't passed. We need action. We need not just talk. I think it's very, very important. And even strengthening the sentence of repeat gun offenders. We need to enact some of these things so this way people feel more secure. We're not talking about taking away weapons. We're looking for sensible gun laws.
Okay. All right, let's stay with you, Mr. George. 1 minute. Our state's unfunded pension liability is $130 billion. What's to be done about that?
Well, first off, retirement. Somebody is offered a retirement. You can't just take that away. It's just not fair. I mean, I have a retirement myself, and when I go to retire, I don't want to just have it taken away. It doesn't make sense. When you go into a job or a position, you're offered a compensation package just like any of the corporate executives or anybody else. At time of retirement, for them to come back and say, we need to change this, is not acceptable. Economic development, in my opinion, is the #1 thing. Just shaving off 10% of the budget or reallocating funds for one thing or another is not going to satisfy what we have in the way of a liability or our current expenses. We need action. We need economic development. We need to plan for the future. It's not just shaving off or trying to be cautious in our spending. We need actual economic development so this way we can move forward.
So there's 2 different types of ways in which we need to address the pension crisis. Right now, the only thing that is politically viable to do is what I call kind of small potatoes things. That was the piece that we were able to do in the budget this year that I had authored in the Senate that gave early buyouts to people, saved the state money, provided better certainty on behalf of the recipient, saving taxpayers over $400 million a year. That was a small step, but nowhere near the kind of fundamental reform that's necessary. The fundamental reform is only going to happen when everybody comes to the table, and that includes the unions. So far today, the unions have been unwilling to come to the table to sit down and negotiate a comprehensive solution to our pension crisis in the state. It's happened in other states. Arizona had this problem. The unions came to the table, negotiated a deal, required to change their state constitution as it will probably require to ours, but they made it happen. To date, those special interests are unwilling to come to the table, and nothing's going to happen until everybody comes.
Senator, we stick with you for 1 minute, and let's keep on this subject. Do you support a graduated income tax? Why or why not?
So I do not support a graduated income tax in that one of the benefits that we have in Illinois, we don't have a lot, right? We don't have wonderful beaches and nice snowy mountains that people want to go to. One of the things that helps keep people in the state is our income tax rate. It's certainly not our property tax rate, right? It's certainly not our overall tax rate. Those people who promote a graduated income tax, interestingly enough, from the governor on down, refuse to offer a plan as to how much the percentages will be, what will it cost, who, in regards to this. And I would say that anybody who says they support a graduated income tax and are unwilling to give you percentages and brackets are hoping to pull the wool over your eyes and say long term we're going to stick it to the middle class. That's what's happened in other states, happened in California, it's happened in other states. We need to be very careful that it doesn't happen here.
Mr. Georges?
Yes, I support a graduated income tax. We are surrounded by states that have a graduated income tax. We have a history of states that have this in their structure, in their system. We are one of, I don't remember if it was 8 or 11 states, I believe it's 8 states that do not have a graduated income tax. It doesn't make sense. Yes, we have a high property tax, but if you look at us in comparison to income tax, we are lower compared to other areas. So we need to equalize our property tax and our income tax. I'm in favor of a graduated income tax, but one which does not affect the middle and lower class. It's more of a millionaire's tax. Millionaire's tax which only affects the top 2, top 5%, and a bipartisan approach. So someone in the legislature can sit down across the aisle and come up with some type of structure which is mutually agreeable. It shouldn't be just one side or the other. We have to have a working relationship.
All right, we'll stick with you, Mr. Georges. We this year are electing a governor. Name an issue where you disagree with your party's nominee for governor.
With my party's governor, well, the only thing that I could potentially say is that it'd be nice if there was something which wasn't a billionaire versus a billionaire. Other than that, I think there's a lot of things that JB has in mind in the way of change. I think he's very much in favor of the people. I think he's a billionaire of the people, to say the least. And that being said, if you're talking about other things that I would disagree with him, I don't know, I really can't say too much more than that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So one area in which I disagree with my governor is in regards to pension reform. So was it earlier this year or last year? I can't remember now. Chicago has a very problematic pension system. They came to the table with a proposal. They needed to come through the legislature that would have actually solved one of their pension system's problems and would have done it with just Chicago money and with just changes in their own system. Would not have required a dime, which is frankly unusual, right? Chicago coming and not asking for the rest of the state's money. But it would not have required a dime from anybody else in the rest of the state. I was one of only 3 Republicans in the Senate who supported this measure from Rahm Emanuel because I thought any steps in the right direction was the right step. Governor vetoed that measure because he said, well, I just want comprehensive pension reform. I think this would only be a drop in the bucket. I'm sorry, but any progress that I think we can make is good progress to make. I've told the governor this on this and other issues, and I think this is an example of where I disagree with the governor.
Some audience questions are pouring in. Senator McConchie, what would you do for gerrymandering and redistricting?
So, a lot of people want fairer elections, okay? And here's the thing: you want to have a more even ground when it comes to the way your districts are drawn and the way in which money is raised, okay? And because when it does that, it makes the legislators more responsive. I think 60% of the senators who are up this cycle don't even have an opponent. Their districts are so gerrymandered that there is no opponent at all. So I supported the measure that we tried to put on the ballot a couple of years ago that Speaker Madigan's lawyers got kicked off the ballot in a 4-3 vote on the Supreme Court that would set up an independent commission that would draw the boundaries without any sort of look at the way in which party affiliations are set up. I think that is what's vitally important to help ensure that state legislators across the board are responsive to the people who are sending them there.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Georges?
I think if you're looking at redistricting and gerrymandering, District 26 is a perfect example. If you took a look at the map itself, there are portions where, I'll take Mundelein, my hometown. 3/4 of Mundelein, the heart of Mundelein, is taken out of District 26, and 1/4 of Mundelein stays within District 26. The north and west portion of Mundelein, all the open areas and the areas where the lack of the population is. And it all goes into the district next to me. So granted, it does go to both sides of the aisle. So it benefits one side and it also benefits the other. But it does not allow for new individuals or new candidates to actually come into the system because the system is rigged against individuals who are trying to get into the system. I'm definitely not a politician by trade. I don't ever claim to be, don't ever truly want to be. But I think we need a whole lot of change here, and this is definitely one topic where we need change.
We earlier discussed pensions a bit. We got an audience question. It's really, really interesting. If I can read this here. We're starting with you, Mr. George, in 1 minute. It says, I know I guess it says paramedic in the district who is retiring at age 52. His benefits are very generous. Full lifetime medical, 3% annual increases on his starting pension of $75,000. This is a huge burden for taxpayers. What is your view?
Well, I think we need to take a look at the bigger picture. What was his compensation package at the date of hire? How much do those individuals truly make when they start or enter their jobs? Over a long period or a career, do they make an equivalent pay which is equivalent to those that are not or doing similar jobs? So one person may take a lower salary at the beginning or throughout a career, but in turn they make up for it at the time of retirement. So yes, it is a huge burden, but I think when you look at a big picture, it's a whole lot different than just taking one person or one specific year. I do disagree with the last 3 years where they hike up their pay. That I disagree with. So not to say that any system is perfect. There definitely needs improvements. There definitely needs to be relook at everything. And that's what hopefully I'm here for. Hopefully we can look at things and make things more acceptable to the big picture as opposed to just one particular instance.
So generally speaking, I mean, the private sector has gotten out of the pension business because it's unsustainable, right? Especially as we live longer, people are retiring earlier. Which is why for the vast majority of government workers, my preference would be that they enter into some sort of 401k program that is duplicative, if you will, or the same as what happens in the private sector. I do think that there are specific sectors of government work, such as public safety, that we should look at maintaining within a pension system, but we can't do it in such a way because of the type of job it is. It's a dangerous job. You may be injured and may have to leave the work early. So there needs to be some sort of safety net for those people that we ask so much from in that capacity. But the system itself has to be restructured. We need to consolidate downstate fire pension systems, reduce the overall cost, and then really do adjust the benefits for new people coming in, especially in order to make it affordable.
Okay, some differences there, it sounds like. Senator McConchie, let's stay with you here. 1 minute, we're getting some climate change type questions and renewable energy and whatnot. How can Illinois take advantage of the Future Energy Jobs Act?
So I voted against the Future Energy Jobs Act because it, at its core, was a corporate bailout for Exelon. Okay, Exelon, which is making billions of dollars in profit, came in and said, we need to do rate hikes in order to fatten our own bottom line, or we're just going to, they were holding a gun to the head of the people of Illinois and saying we're just going to shut down 2 of our nuclear power plants. As a consequence of that, I voted against that because I just fundamentally disagreed with a private company holding a gun to the head of taxpayers and saying, we just want more money to line our pockets. There was good things that came out of that bill that benefit clean energy. I think that some of those things are underway. We're going to have to see kind of just how far they go. We're not at the best place in the country, right? We don't have lots of sun. We don't have, you know, big rivers that we can dam up and you know, do hydroelectric and things like that. So we're not going to be quite as effective as some other states would be in regards to it.
We may not be effective in certain areas, but other areas we have a huge benefit with Lake Michigan. And as with water right now in the Chicagoland area, we're taking advantage of it, and I think it's phenomenal. Other places are taking advantage of it as well. We can easily do a lot more and make it economically beneficial to increase all types of energy sectors within our area. You go anywhere throughout our country, you see windmills all over the place. We're talking water systems, and like I said, Lake Michigan, which is a huge benefit to us that we're truly not taking full advantage of. There are so many sectors that we can do in an environmental, that would have an environmental impact and still benefit us, to include increasing the economy. There's sectors of business that can jump on board with the economy, which would be huge, which are untapped or undeveloped. So,
Okay, Mr. Georges, we start with you this round. 1 minute. What is your plan to fund our infrastructure, roadways and railways? Let me add to that. Would you support an infrastructure bill, and how are we going to pay for it?
yes, I would support a bill such as that. I think there's a number of issues that we can do without raising taxes. I think we can easily go down, whether it be bonds or actually having some kind of coordination with IDOT, so this way funds can be transferred from one to the other. We need infrastructure. We need roads developed in our areas. I know it was discussed at the last forum here, but we have a we need growth. We need huge amount of development in our infrastructure and roads. Going east-west in our corridor is terrible. Going north-south, we have 12 to the north, we have 83 to the south, and they basically stop almost coming into District 26. With the infrastructure, with the road development, I think we will invite a whole lot of business, a whole lot of corporations to enter our area and actually conduct business with a better tax base, with more increased individuals coming into the area, with new job growth, with bringing our people back to Illinois rather than watching them leave.
Senator McConchie, 1 minute.
So we haven't had a capital bill since 2009. We are certainly overdue for one. I do think that probably within the next year we'll have a capital bill that will go forward. One of the things I think we fundamentally need to change, especially in the way in which we do budgeting here in the state, which is largely run by the leaders, and I'd be happy to give you some background on how that doesn't work to your benefit. But we do not essentially fund ongoing capital needs in the way that we ought to in the state budget, right? We rely extraordinarily heavy on kind of capital bill one time in a decade kind of things to do a big influx into the system. Where your local units of government, whether you're a municipality or what have you, tend to have ongoing capital that they do in a much more kind of robust and and it makes a lot more sense to do it that way. And in regards to our budget, we do have areas I think of which we need to cut spending elsewhere, shift that money into infrastructure. I've proven that I can do it in a budget that we ran last year. I believe that we can do it. It's just going to take political will.
Thank you. Sticking with you, Senator, please explain your positions on a woman's right to choose, or I'll say abortion, I'll amend that to say, please state your position on abortion, women's health, contraception, and prenatal care.
So I am pro-life. I believe that the unborn child has a value. Right now, the Supreme Court has limited the state's ability to be able to have, I think, constructive debate about that since 1973. I think that has been to our detriment. I think that it is the Supreme Court taking it out of the hands of the people to have a discussion about it has short-circuited that process. The Supreme Court essentially allows for abortion in all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason through its 2 different cases that it passed down in that time. The very few areas in which we do have the ability to kind of do something about largely have to do with funding. And I oppose the requirement that taxpayers have to fund the abortions of other people. We passed that in this state last year. I voted no. I would try to undo that because I don't believe that it's something that is as critical as something as kind of morally questionable as the issue of abortion should require all taxpayers everywhere to fund it.
Mr. Georges.
I am pro-choice. I know my opponent voted against the ratification of equal rights. I also know my opponent voted against the expansion of the Affordable Care Act to coverage of all brands of contraception. I'm taking it from a different viewpoint in the sense where I am pro-choice, but I'm also male. So yes, a woman should have full rights over her body. But coming from a father, I think that it's very important that a woman and a couple make that decision with the support of the church and all the other support groups that are out there. I think it's very important that you afford the opportunity in certain circumstances where if there was a case of rape or incest or something like that, that it is done in a clean and safe environment. We must be able to make sure and instill that safe environment. It's not that I'm in favor of abortion, but I think it should be a pro-choice decision based upon a situation.
Mr. Georges, 1 minute. Do you support legalizing recreational marijuana?
I support legalization of limited amounts of cannabis, yes. I think we should be able to incorporate that. This is something that's gone on for centuries. We're not going to stop it. Alcohol and everything else that went along with the prohibition, we could not stop it. It's just going to happen. So we might as well embrace it and use it in a way which we can actually somewhat control it. So this way, putting the money aside, putting the taxation aside, develop programs so this way we can actually help those who can do something and recover from the addiction if it gets to that point. If you have a mild or social drinker and they get in a car, is it really much different than having a mild or social user and they get in a car? You know, we really need to embrace a modern society. We need to understand the changes, and really it's not a change because this has been going on for thousands of years.
So we have a number of states that are currently experimenting with legalization of recreational marijuana. And the officials I've talked to in those states, they've fairly uniformly said that the jury's still out as to whether or not this is a good thing for them to do. So they've brought in more taxpayer dollars, but then they've also have increased expenses in regards to social services and things like that that have come along with that. You know, one of the things that I look at when it comes to something like this is what does law enforcement say? And the Illinois Associations of the Chief of Police and the Illinois Sheriff's Association have both come out and publicly said that they believe that we should not legalize recreational marijuana at this time, that they believe that these experiments that are going on in other states need to continue to keep going, that we can learn from what it is that they're doing, so that if we get to a point that we did legalize it, we would do it in the best way possible.
Thank you. Keep the microphone, Senator. We'll start with you. 1 minute. How can Illinois promote a skilled workforce throughout the state when public schools are not equally funded?
Well, this is a big reason why I did to help to negotiate education funding reform. You know, we have huge disparities in which our schools in the state. I'd like to point to 2 districts right outside of my area. North Chicago School District, they spend $7,000 per year per student. Right next door in Lake Bluff is the Rondout School District, which spends $32,000 a year per student. That kind of disparity is harmful to children and it's immoral, okay? So one of the things that we need to do is, as we're continuing to increase funding, which is what we did in education funding reform, is get it to those schools that need it the most in order to help bring those districts up and bring those kids up so that they aren't missing out just because of their zip code. The other thing we need to do is foster additional partnerships between our community colleges and our school districts. I just toured a plant in Libertyville yesterday, Laser Precision. They get a lot of kids. One of their top workers, 17 years old, came out of the schools, works for them, has been working there almost 20 years now. Great job. This is the type of things we need to promote.
Thank you, Mr. Georges, and you have 4 additional seconds.
To say the least, I think it's a very unfair system. I think, yes, schools should be similar. They should be required to have the same type of education. They should be afforded the same opportunities. I 100% agree with that. But looking on the other side of the coin, is it fair that someone pays more in their property taxes? So I think we need to actually have some bipartisan approach to actually address this. I think a lot more funding has to be addressed at the state level as opposed to the county level, because the county levels, they're the ones who actually determined the rates which determine your property taxes, and the majority of property tax goes towards your schooling. So it needs reform, it needs to be looked at, and it needs a bipartisan approach.
Mr. Georges, 1 minute. What's your vision for modernizing state, county, local, and special purpose governments to be more accountable, transparent, and fiscally sustainable?
Well, I think everything should be open to the public. I have no issues with anything being visible to anybody, and information after a decision should always be considered to be public knowledge. People should understand their legislators. They should be aware of what's going on, just as if they're sitting in the seat. Because I have a Intel background, I understand that a lot of the information out there is not always open or available, especially at the higher or federal levels, which in many cases is understandable. However, it's difficult because you don't get a true grasp of the concepts of how a decision comes about. That being said, especially when it comes to finances, it should be open and available. I know, for instance, a lot of the counties are complaining about certain expenditures that they did not ever have to tell the public what they were spending it on. They didn't have to go out there and bid on contracts. It was open to everybody, and I think that needs to change.
Senator McConchie?
So one of the big things we need to do is streamline consolidation opportunities, right? So I inquired of staff recently and asked about, there was a couple of school districts actually within my area where there's a question of whether or not they should merge or one portion be segment off so it ends up in another school district. So I asked what the process was to do that. It took a week to find out the answer, and it's very, very complicated, right? We need to streamline that kind of process, and then I believe in returning power to the hands of the people so that you can make the decision on your own. We make it very easy to create units of government, but we don't make it easy for you to eliminate them. So for example, I introduced a bill this year that would allow currently according to state law, you can go to referendum to raise your property taxes, but you cannot go to referendum to lower your property taxes. I believe that's wrong. I believe if you can do it one way, you should be able to do it the other. So I introduced a bill to be able to do that. I believe that you should be able to vote and say, we want our townships merged. We don't allow those type of things except in very difficult circumstances. We need to make that a lot easier.
Do you think every municipality should be obligated to ensure that affordable housing exists in their community? Why or why not?
Well, we're limited by the federal government. The federal government has very specific rules in regards to this. I think that each municipality does need to make some amount of affordable housing available, but to what extent the state has oversight of that and the federal government has oversight of that is something that I'm not very familiar with, frankly.
I'm not sure how to expound more than what Senator McConchie already did. I think that's more at a federal level. I think funding on a HUD basis definitely, could be easily introduced to various communities to assist individuals at all levels. So I'm going to basically stop at that.
Okay, well, keep the microphone, Mr. Georges. Children are allowed to get married at 16 in Illinois with parental consent. Is that too young? Would you change this?
I'm not sure if that's a historical thing or a religious basis or what. In my personal viewpoint, yes, I think that's a little too young, especially in our modern society. I think individuals should not be required, but should understand what's required to be and do in our current society. Going to school, getting a good job, actually getting some kind of a financial backing, meaning a savings account or equity into a home or real estate, I think is extremely important. So this way you can go into a relationship or into a marriage and be a partner and not just be something that's where you're going in as a equal individual as opposed to something where you're still a child in a sense.
So I'm a strong supporter of 18, meaning that you're an adult, and at that point you get to make decisions. If you're under 18, you're under the jurisdiction of your parents. We have this tendency to try to draw lines at other points, whether it be 21 for some things or underage for others. I think that there may be extenuating circumstances in which someone under the 18, might get married, but I can't think of what those might be, other than perhaps pregnancy and so forth. But generally speaking, I believe that at 18 is when you're an adult, and that you at that point deserve the full rights associated with being an adult, and then we should stop drawing lines at other places.
Senator, what is Speaker Madigan's legacy and grade President Trump's performance after almost 2 years?
So it's very interesting, the question of Speaker Madigan's legacy, because he was asked this question last year on the radio. He does very few public interviews, but he did an interview on the radio. The very last question he was asked by this reporter was, what is your legacy? And he had no answer to that question. He's the longest serving speaker in United States history. I'm 45, he's been in office longer than I've been alive. And you would think that he would know, right, what his legacy is. I think that this is just, this is the problem that we have in our state in regards to the current structure and the way in which he maintains power, which limits your ability and your rights to be able to do things. President Trump, I wish he'd shut his mouth and, I'd take him off of Twitter.
Just to add, I believe in that radio interview, Speaker Madigan said that he was proud that he had children who were employed.
Yes, that's right. That's right. He did do that.
Mr. Georges, Speaker Madigan's legacy and grade President. Oh, you didn't grade. You know what, Senator? Let's give you 30 more seconds. Give President Trump a grade.
So I would say that in regards to anything that he talks about and does, I would give him a D in regards to that. Again, I wish he'd shut his mouth. In regards to the economy, I think I would give him an A minus. I mean, I think our economy is doing very well. He's embraced policies that have helped go forward, at least not for the economy to get out of the way. So I give him kind of different grades on different kind of portions of what he's done.
All right, Mr. Georges, Speaker Madigan's legacy and grade President Trump.
Speaker Madigan, I know this question, there was a similar question in the previous forum. I'm going to say heart for him. I think, as I don't recall which one of the candidates said it before, he's been in office a long time. Someone who's in office that long has to want to be there. I think it's uncommon for someone to be there that long, but he has to believe that he's doing what he thinks is the best thing. So in that sense, I give him credit. As for Mr. Trump, or President Trump, I can do that on different levels as well. I think socially you definitely have to address the Twitter issue. I think he would behoove to listen to his staff when he originally came into office and got rid of his cell phone as well. To say the least, I think long term we need to take a look at things, because economically it may be good now, but what are the long-term ramifications, especially on an international scale? We don't know what's going to happen yet. He might be doing very well for the U.S. right now, but we're not alone. This is a global world, a global economy. We have to consider all of that today. But socially, I'm going to say an F. Overall, I don't know, and I've taken, can I get an extra 30 seconds?
Yes.
I'm going to take a military approach only because, as a military guy, I would venture to say that we probably only know a fraction of the information that he's being bombarded with. So that being said, what we're provided by the media is a little different than the information that he receives. So I'll give him 5% credit, but 95% I'm going to say it's time for a change.
All right, keep the microphone, Mr. Georges. Lots of questions about social issues in school. We got this in the previous forum as well. Let me modify it slightly. Do you think Illinois high schools should be required to include discussions of consensual sex and or LGBT issues and information?
I think this was a topic that you had voted on, where my opponent actually said he voted against the requirement of LGBTQ type issues in the high schools. And as a teacher, I don't know how they actually set their agendas. Should you be required to address the topic? Should you be required to address American history as opposed to European history, or depending on what class you're in? I think it should be a topic that should be an option, maybe not necessarily a requirement, but an option to be taught, and it should be aware, something that's aware because it's part of our society, just like everything else, whether it be marriage, whether it be economics, whether it be something else, we have to be able to have the option of addressing it. It can't be just taken off the table.
Well, this is a question of unfunded mandates from the state level, right? Whether or not the state should be mandating that certain school districts do certain things. There are some things I voted against that I, maybe like personally, but I voted against them because they were yet another unfunded mandate on local schools that raise costs and limit the ability of schools to be able to perhaps provide some core, trainings that they need to be doing. In regards to the question of consensual sex, I do think that schools play a role in ensuring that our kids are good citizens, right? Unfortunately, not every parent is, necessarily raises their child to respect others in the way that they ought. Our schools are an environment in which we can help teach kids that kind of respect and responsibility, and especially in today's society where we have harassment and things like that at such epidemic levels, I think our schools play a vital role in that.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. Senator, we start with you. Is climate change real, and what role can the legislature play in reducing it?
So I would say yes, that climate change is real. The scientists are the ones who are the experts in that. I am not. I take them at their word in regards to that. That said, there's not a lot that a state by itself is able to do. This is something that really is a global problem and needs to be taken care of at a national level. There has been attempts in certain cases, like with California and stuff, to try to make some progress on this in regards to vehicle emissions and things like that. They have a size that enables them to try to essentially kind of bring the rest of the country along on some of this. We are not anywhere near their size to be able to do that. So we just have to be very careful that anything we would do does not undermine the ability of our businesses to be able to continue to operate and offer jobs and be competitive.
Mr. Jordan, 1 minute.
I agree with the majority of that. However, I do think that the environmental impact that we could have could equally correlate to a business impact and an economic development here within the state. Yes, the majority of it is at a federal level because of we're all one world per se type of aspect, but we can still promote it here in the state. We can still help develop it here in the state. We can still take action which will actually show and set examples, so this way we can be there in a sense where we can promote businesses to come into the area, we can promote their activity, we can promote the research, we can promote their development. So there are steps and actions that we can take on an environmental scale which will definitely help towards that progress. And if somebody doesn't pick up the ball and take action, you can't turn to the next person and say it's your fault or their fault. We have to take action.
Thank you, Mr. Georges. All right, time requires now that we move to the closing statements by the candidates. You'll have 1 minute each. Senator McConchie, we will start with you because we started with Mr. Georges. So 1 minute.
Well, thank you very much for coming out here today and spending your Saturday morning. Look forward to chatting with you afterward. Last year, we increased income taxes in the state by 32%, from 3.75 to 4.95%. We still have a structural deficit of at least $1.2 billion. Okay, we have an issue. The issue that we have in Springfield is not a revenue problem; it is a spending problem. It is an insatiable spending problem that we have that has to be gotten under control. And it's interesting, last year I actually introduced a budget that was balanced without the tax increase. So I showed that it can be done. I was one of the chief negotiators on education funding reform, which has really been universally accepted by the education community as something very beneficial to our state in helping move our state forward in regards to this. And on pension reform, been a leader on that in my short time down there. I look forward to trying to make changes on property tax reform here in the upcoming year. And being able to take some of your ideas down to Springfield as well.
I will start off also by saying thank you very much. I greatly appreciate being invited here today. Taken from the Illinois Department of Revenue, PIO-16. In fact, until the Depression of the 1930s, property tax was the main source of funding for the state government. Today, however, only local governments levy and collect property tax. Most income here comes from income tax at the state level. If you want change for property tax, we need to address, and you need to get to know who your local county board candidates are. Yes, states do have, or excuse me, state legislators have a minimal amount of effect on your property tax, but it's nowhere near what anybody is saying that they can affect or they can change. Need to look at your county levels. I think there are referendums, I think there's legislation that we can put into the system which could actually help. I don't think putting it in the people's hands in the Senate, we need.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please greet the potential voters after the forum. That concludes our forum. We'll hear from them after a 10-minute break.